Welcome to the Whole Leader podcast. I'm Richard Britton. I've spent years building companies inside systems that rarely put people first, and one question keeps coming back to me. What would leading look like if people really mattered? Many of the systems we work in were never designed with that as the starting point, and the result is disconnection, loss of agency, and a sense that something isn't quite right. In this podcast, as I explore what this means in practice, I talk with people who are trying to do things differently, reflecting on themselves, on leadership, and on the systems they are creating. Welcome to the Whole Leader podcast. Today, my guest is Emily Cummin, founder and CEO of Untangle, a grief support platform helping people feel less alone after loss, with community, practical guidance, and trusted support. Emily's work has reached people in 138 countries, been recognised by Tech Nation's Rising Stars, and helped open up one of the conversations that society still finds hardest to have. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here and talk about this.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. What made me think it would be good to do an episode with you, I was actually chatting to my sister, she's a doctor, and she was saying, you should do a podcast about death. Because it happens all of the time. As a doctor, you see it all the time, but nobody talks about it. And so maybe that's a place to start. It's a topic that people don't talk about. It seems to be a taboo, and it's a subject that you're an expert in. Maybe you could tell us why you think that is.
It definitely is a taboo. And it's interesting because one of the challenges, initially I thought, well, let's get all of society talking about death. And actually what I've realized over time is it's much easier to get the people who've experienced death talking to each other because we, I think, are scared of talking about death because we think somehow it will happen to us or bring bad luck. And I think people are quite superstitious and we're fearful as well. I mean, death is the only certainty in life, right? It's like the ultimate human fear and reminder that life is finite and you only get one life. And so I think people are just scared of confronting their own mortality. And I think it's quite interesting that such a big longevity movement has emerged. You look at people like Brian Johnson, and that is ultimately people trying to fight death.
Yeah, totally.
And rather than talking about, let's talk about death, let's have conversations about it, let's talk about grief. We've kind of gone the other way where there's lots of people trying to say, let's just conquer it.
Let's talk about immortality, upload our brains onto a computer.
Exactly. So I think that's why, it's still such a taboo.
And your business, Untangle, has clearly done extraordinarily well, 138 countries, lots of accolades and recognition. Could you tell us a little bit more about what Untangle does?
So I started Untangle after my grandpa died. The oldest daughter, oldest grandchild, stepped in. Actually, my parents were getting divorced as well. So I kind of stepped in to help everyone. And I kind of found none of my friends had gone through a loss. So I was quite young, no one to talk to about it. And I saw that with my grandma and all other family members. Like everyone was grieving differently. There was loads of admin to do. And there just didn't really seem to be a place to go. There were kind of a few great charities, but I kind of, didn't really want to reach out to a charity. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if there was a place that kind of you can go to, you can get support, you can talk to other people going through something similar, feel less alone, and that kind of holds your hand through a lot of the admin, which is very overwhelming as well. So that was kind of the beginning of Untangle. And mainly now we're a peer-to-peer support community. So we have lots of moderated chat groups based on, who died, how they died, when they died. Who you are as a person. So if you're young, maybe you're caring for kids, there's support groups for you. And we do video support groups. And then we work with trusted selected partners who can support with this kind of services along the way as well.
I guess for lots and lots of people, they've not been able to find anything like this elsewhere. What about the services that you're introducing them to through that? What sort of things is it that people are looking for to be fixed up to?
Before Untangle came along, people were already using these services. So planning funerals, normally they're going through probate. £1 trillion of assets moves from generation to generation every year in the UK. So it's an enormous market. There's lots of inheritance tax to pay. There's lots of legalities. And typically people spend about £12,000 on a death. And so there's there was a lot of people doing these things, but they're doing them maybe, with a solicitor they'd never met before, or trying to do it themselves and unsure whether they're doing it right. It's quite hard to find a therapist. I mean, some amazing kind of therapy platforms have emerged. But actually, when you're grieving and it's normally the first or second time maybe that you've gone through a loss and you're very overwhelmed. You don't want to be thinking about all of the kind of admin and trying to find a trusted service and am I being ripped off and who should I speak to? So what we do is we connect people to, whether it's a probate lawyer who specializes in someone who was a company director, or a therapist that might understand estranged relationships. So, and that's, we work with all different partners. We're careful with who we work with. And the idea is that we can get you the right help for you at the right time, but you're not being kind of overwhelmed or bombarded. And I think that is really important. But the main thing that people really come to us for is this kind of peer-to-peer support group, because actually, grief, it's not a mental health condition. It is a human, natural response to loss. And actually giving people a space to talk about that openly, there's not that many places that exist like that. And we don't shy away from, letting people talk about the really hard stuff. So, and it was obviously a bit of a challenge. Like, one of the big things for me when we first started was making sure that we had our safeguarding set up and that we had our moderation and, that we're not a crisis service, but that we can kind of triage people who are in crisis. Lots of people lose a sense of purpose, their identity, their belief system, maybe their financial security when someone dies. And that can make you feel like, you don't want to wake up in the morning. And that's a hard thing to admit to friends, to family, to people that love you. So we try and create a space where people can say those things. And it's okay. And, we're not trying to fix you. It's just a space to acknowledge those things as well. I mean, and there's lots of funny, ridiculous, humorous parts of grief. So it's not all incredibly dark, but it's a real range.
The kind of the peer-to-peer community and the services that people are getting just by speaking with one another, that sounds like that is a bit of a minefield for you to have to navigate as you work out how are you going to moderate the groups, what are the things that you're going to allow for in those groups, what are the things that are not really within the professional boundaries of what you're trying to do, and how have you worked through that? Because that must have been a learning journey for you.
It has been, and we're still learning, and we don't get it right always, I think, is the first thing to say. One of the advantages of us being a kind of startup, my background's in business strategy and product development. I haven't come from a clinical setting. So, maybe I was slightly more naive or risk averse or less risk averse, but in a way that's enabled us to try things out and test them. So there is an element of being able to kind of play and explore and say, listen, we're not going to get this right always, but we're doing our best. But the way I actually started was I set up a meetup group. So a bereavement meetup group and actually a divorce and separation meetup group initially, because eventually we'd love to support people for all different types of challenges. But and we used to meet in pubs in person. I'd book a pub, a table for 10 and wait. And the first few, I honestly sat at these huge tables and, the bartender would come over and say, oh, I'm sorry your friends aren't here. Would you like a free drink? Or do you want me to take some chairs and tables away? But carried on doing this and stuck it out. And eventually we had this, I think we grew to the biggest bereavement and divorce support groups in person in the UK. And we had kind of local chapters, different people ran them. And what kind of developed from doing that and just chatting with people was a bit of a methodology for, what might people want to talk about? How do we facilitate conversations and give people a space that feels safe and doesn't give them, people don't feel pressured to share, but they can if they want to. And so a bit of trial and error through kind of facilitating those, and you get all different personalities from all different places, all different losses. And you're trying to balance that and through kind of that. And then we kind of tested with WhatsApp groups and, an Instagram community. And each time we've kind of tweaked it and, challenges have arisen and we respond to those as they come and then we update our policies. So I guess it's been a test and learn in the same way as you would with any kind of startup or new business. But making sure we do have like fallbacks for safeguarding. And the community is also amazing. Like they support each other. They moderate to some extent themselves, that there is an element of goodwill, I think, that comes with Untangle. So that's been great as well.
A question that I've got here, because my sort of default would be, okay, in a grieving situation, people will sort of rely on their families and loved ones around them to support through that difficult time. But this sounds like it's going way beyond that, and people are talking to strangers. Where's that need coming from? What's happening that people aren't getting what they need within their closer circles? Maybe after the funeral, and their friends have started to forget about what's happened. But with their own families, I'm wondering why they need this.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, not everyone does.
Yeah.
But one of the lots of people say after kind of a few weeks after the funeral, support drops off. No one asks about it. And this goes back to your first question about grief and death being a taboo. Often people don't want to bring up the person who's died. Like a friend might not want to because they don't want to remind you. And actually, a lot of the time, that person doesn't need reminding that their mum died. Yeah. Actually, they'd love to be able to talk about them.
Yeah.
So often there's not a space to talk about it with friends. People change the subject. And then with family, everyone grieves differently, even within a whole family. Everyone's relationship will be different. Their attachment styles are different. And because of that, it can be quite difficult. If anything, a lot of people have described it, it can feel quite lonely being with your family. They're the people closest to you. Maybe they knew that person really well. Yeah. And yet you're all having a very different experience. Maybe one person really wants to talk about them all the time and someone else actually would rather not. And that tension can mean that people sometimes look, for another community to grieve in. And the other thing is, sometimes you don't want to kind of burden your family or worry them. We've heard that a lot, especially people who've lost a partner, and they've got kids, and they want to hold space for their teenage children's grief. And so they're looking for somewhere else to be able to kind of talk about the things that they're finding difficult. So there's lots of reasons. And sometimes it's just nice to talk to strangers that don't know you, they don't judge you, they don't care. I mean, they do care, but actually it's sometimes can be quite refreshing to be able to just talk really openly. And so that's kind of the needs that Untangle fills. And it's not a reflection on the fact that family or friends aren't great. It's just they might not understand what you're going through, and you might want to find some people that do, and that's okay,
And they're probably in a shared experience because they're going through something similar, and so they're more open to it. I was interested in something you said right at the start about how some people think perhaps talking about death might also be unlucky in a way. That was a word you chose.
Yeah.
That's obviously part of this, people not wanting to kind of enter into the conversation. What do you mean when you talk about that?
I think there's a bit of superstition around death. Yeah. If you talk about it, it's going to happen to you. And we've seen also even people who have terminal illnesses sometimes, we have an anticipatory grief group. So someone who either themselves or their loved ones knows that they're terminal, and they join the group for support. And sometimes people don't like to talk about dying because it makes it more real. So I think, we're a bit superstitious. We avoid it. It's uncomfortable. But ultimately, the underlying thing is fear. Fear that it will happen to me or my loved one. You don't. It's not nice hearing about someone else's pain and knowing that could happen to you, because I think there's a lot of kind of just bad and good luck in life. And we try and find meaning in these things and purpose, and there's definitely value to kind of understanding, but sometimes it is just bad luck. And I think that's quite scary to be confronted with. As a human, we think we're in control of our lives and our loved ones, and we take things for granted, and actually bad things happen all the time, and it's just terrible luck. And on the flip side, though, that makes me, and I think a lot of people that have gone through loss, feel like how we are also very lucky to be alive, and for the people that we love to be alive, and to have those relationships. And so on the flip side, it does make you want to live life well.
Gives you a different outlook because you're being confronted by something.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, my own experience in our family when we had unexpected loss was that it was interesting to see how
some people we knew would come and they'd be very approachable and they'd want to ask, and others then we just didn't hear from for a long time. And another thing which I noticed as well is that there's like, maybe it's a generational thing, but there's a more traditional stiff upper lip, let's not talk about it, and everyone just smile and pretend nothing's happened going on there as well. So I can sort of relate to the things you're talking about.
And actually that thing of never hearing from people again, sometimes people say a friend doesn't message them, and then you get too uncomfortable and awkward. You're like, oh no, that person's parent died and I didn't message them. And then time goes on, and then you go into those kind of guilty cycles, and then you think actually it's best to just not say anything. It's been so long. I would say to that actually that most people on the receiving end would rather someone, even if it was a year or 2 years later, acknowledged it and said, listen, I'm really sorry, I didn't know what to say, and and like acknowledge that someone has died. That would be my takeaway from that.
Speaking from experience, I would agree that would be great if people did that more. And then there's the tricky business of work as well. When somebody loses somebody and they've still got work to do. Work's kind of a polished professional experience and environment, and then the kind of the raw and extreme emotions of grief don't easily mix. What do good employers do, and what do you also see that is getting discussed in your communities where it's not working?
It's interesting with work, because for some people actually going into work and throwing themselves in can actually be really helpful. And for others, they've got brain fog. There's lots of physical symptoms of grief as well, and they can't concentrate, and they think, what's the point in this? Why am I sitting in this meeting? My life partner just dropped dead. And so I think acknowledging, one of the things that employers that are kind of supporting people do well is acknowledge that everyone's experience of grief is going to be different. And sometimes it comes years later as well. It might be that, this is a bit of a generalization, but there might be another loss that happens later on. Maybe a beloved like family pet dies, or a cousin, or someone who's, a friend who was the same age as my parent, that can trigger grief from, a past grief. So employers that kind of support people well acknowledge that. So sometimes they give flexible bereavement leave. So, you have X amount of time, but you can take it in different chunks at different points. So, maybe on the lead up to the death anniversary or their birthday, or it might be that it's not the funeral, that's the hardest, or maybe it's the funeral that's hard, but it's actually my kid's first birthday without their father that's going to be difficult. So flexible bereavement leave that gives people a kind of entitlement to take it at different points through the year.
That's such a good idea.
I think it's actually in general quite a good kind of wellness policy to give people kind of agency over, within reason, over that time off. And then the other thing is letting people self-define who qualifies. And I think, gosh, I should have checked this before I came, but the latest government bereavement policy does include this, that because they've just updated the bereavement policies, but you can self-define who counts as a kind of a close loved one.
Yes.
Because, lots of people being raised by different family members or friends, and that death can be more impactful than someone that, is deemed a kind of next of kin. So letting people self-define, and also just acknowledging it and asking them how they want to be treated as well, and checking in on that. Because one of the things, someone in our community said that an email had gone out, their partner died from cancer, and an email had been sent by HR, a well-meaning email to everyone in the company saying that so-and-so's partner had lost their battle with cancer. And she said, well, that's really language I hate. Like he wasn't fighting a battle and he lost and cancer won. Like he was ill and, he was very kind of brave and handled it with grace, throughout. And the idea that he kind of lost his battle is not language that is reflective of how I feel. And she was like, it just felt a bit uncomfortable, everyone in the organisation getting this email. So kind of checking the communication with them, what they want communicated, how, just really simple things, but actually they can make a really big difference.
And easy to get wrong, coming back to the point before, that if people are finding it hard to have a conversation, engage, there's that like difficulty to talk to somebody who's grieving, that it may just be that the company try and do something that's well-meaning without consulting. And, so that's good advice for all businesses.
Yeah. And I think also as a business, you need to drive it. So give them options rather than saying, what would you like? And even if you've not got a lot of options that you offer in your policies, just sitting someone down and saying, we can, this is available to you, or we can communicate this, or we can say to the team, not to bring it up, but you'll bring it up first. Because sometimes it can be hard. You come back, if on the other extreme, people have come back to work and said their first week, every single first person they saw was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I heard your parent died. And actually at some point they're like, I'm just trying to do my job. So again, it's like getting that balance, but give someone options and let them choose rather than putting the kind of mental load onto them to suggest things.
Yes. Now, talking of balance, changing topic slightly, what is the balance you look for in your business when you're trying to create your business model around a company and there are vulnerable people at a difficult point in their life and there are services that they need and you have the facility and you're being kind of put on the platform to offer those services? That's a very difficult thing to do as a founder, and so I'm interested in how you make those decisions.
I haven't always got it right is the answer, and probably haven't
Who does?
moved through it fast enough. And it's been a challenge, to be honest. There's a lot of kind of money in the death space, and people are already spending money on very kind of fragmented services. So there was always an opportunity, like a commercial opportunity here. And that was one of the reasons I thought actually I wanted to build in this space, because you can help people and take money that's being spent maybe on poor services or badly made choices and maybe reduce the cost for individuals, but capture some of that in one place. In reality, we've tried a couple of different business models. So we have a kind of direct-to-consumer subscription, and we've kept it as a kind of low cost as possible. So it was £4.99 a month, really kind of accessible price point. And that kind of covers the business, but it ultimately was not quite the right model for us to kind of scale up. And so this is why we now work with partners. And I think there's an interesting kind of tension there between wanting to make sure we only work with the right partners, but then also thinking about, okay, well, what does this commercial arrangement look like? And where we've landed is, if it's the best thing for the customer, then it will ultimately be best thing for the business. Right. So we often work on a revenue share basis, which is much harder as a business model, because it means that essentially our partners have to be delivering great service and convert the customer.
You're taking all the risk on their level of service in order to actually get paid.
Exactly.
Rather than being a lead gen business. But then it becomes a kind of death funnel, really, where you're trying to, maximize people at the top of that funnel, which is a tricky place to be.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a bit of a tension point that we're exploring at the moment, which is, rather than being lead gen, potentially we work with a few trusted partners on a longer term basis where they have access to our community. We can kind of help use all our knowledge and insight to help them understand how to go to market and how to reach customers and talk to customers in a way that is in the right kind of tone. And, we reach 10 million people a month organically across our community. And so we have, quite a good path for them to reach these people at a very sensitive time. So it's trying to find that balance. And I think that I've probably erred on the side of prioritizing kind of the integrity of the support for our members. And I think that will always be true. But I don't think that they're in conflict. And one of the things I realized over time more and more is that, if the business model doesn't make sense, then you can't provide the service.
No.
And so it's all very well and good having this lovely thing. Yeah. But if you can't find a way of funding it, then it doesn't work. And, that's a tension. And think what's difficult, and a lot of our members are in the US, and they're much more used to paying for services, particularly in the healthcare and the mental health space. Not that we are directly either of those, but it's meant that we've had less kind of resistance. Whereas in the UK, you know, at the early days, we got a couple of really angry 1-star reviews that said, "How dare you capitalize on my grief?" And it's because a lot of the services are provided either, you know, by public health or through charities. And so people aren't used to paying for them. And so it was trying to kind of balance that and kind of educate people on, well, this is what you get, and this is the comparison. So still, to be honest with you, playing with the business model, and there's definitely more to do and more to explore.
Definitely a strong argument to say that because you're in the middle of this space, which most of society doesn't want to look at, you will at least know what good looks like, and you'll have seen it all, you know, good, bad, and indifferent. And so, you know, maybe there's nothing wrong with monetizing that knowledge because you know you're going to get people a good service. Is anybody sort of setting a level of standards? Like there's, you know, consumer associations, or in this country or in the US, is anyone trying to actually kind of say this is what the standard should be?
There was, Vicky Wilson made a bereavement standard. So there was something that was rolled out, but I don't know if it's been, like, there has been some adoption, but it's, you know, there's not like a B Corp equivalent that is really, really widely recognized. And I think that would be a good thing for, you know, there was a working group that the government had around this. And did you do some work? I can't remember if you did some work.
I've not done any work in it. I have discussed it before with people in the industry, as you mentioned. Vicky and I had a conversation about it when she was involved in the bereavement standard. But my experience is very shallow in this area, so I can't give you any depth on it.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely more work to do. But this goes back to our earlier point that people don't like talking about death and dying. And in the Vulnerable Consumers Act, bereaved consumers now qualify as well. And so companies do have to make sure that, you know, if you're calling up Vodafone to cancel your parents' phone contract because they died, that they have a level of care and support for that customer. So there is some incentive from that perspective, but there isn't really a kind of, I'd say, nationally or internationally recognized standard.
Right.
And I think part of the reason is because people don't like talking and thinking about it.
They don't like thinking about it and talking about it. As you said, in this country, £1 trillion is passing between generations each year. So it's sort of from a pure sort of startup point of view, you would say, you know, your total addressable market is huge. And at the same time, I don't see or hear about, let's say, technology advancing in the same pace as we see in so many other areas at the moment, right? So from a data and technology point of view, what does good look like in terms of supporting this sector?
There's been kind of waves of tech companies, you know, including Untangle, trying to help people at this time. And it's an interesting question of like, what's working, what's not working. There's a company in the US that provide bereavement support to employees through insurance companies and employers.
Okay.
And you know, they've grown a lot. So I think that there are some companies getting traction in this space, tech companies. But I think in reality, I mean, funerals are a very localized business, right? Like you have a body, you need to dispose of them. And direct cremation is growing. So that's when you essentially send a body off, they cremate them and return the ashes. And then you can do a kind of memorialize that person in whatever way you want. So that's maybe less localized way of doing funeral, but it's quite localized, that business. And then I think that the tech kind of challenge is they've just introduced digital death certificates for the first time. So that's great. And that does open some doors. But essentially, it's a very paper-based industry and it's very regulated. You know, you're talking to people's banks where they had kind of subscriptions, their insurance policies. So to kind of access and talk to all those people and make sure that there's no fraud happening is quite difficult. And the reality is where the money sits is basically funerals and financial and legal services around the estate.
Yeah.
And there are, some businesses doing great work in specifically those things and digitizing those processes, but often providing digital kind of tools to, lawyers and law firms who are essentially the front people for that, rather than direct to consumer. So there is some work happening, but I think like where we are, for example, it's like helping you with that process, closing accounts, or providing emotional support. People aren't spending money there, and so there isn't necessarily commercial opportunity direct to consumer. And so, the way some businesses have gone around this is, well, if you've got an insurance policy, do you get an assurance policy alongside it? And so, that would be one route to go down. From a tech perspective, you're wanting to make sure that people's very sensitive data is protected. And that's the challenge. And I think what we've done very well is because we have this active community, we have a lot of data points on like who people are and what their concerns are, what they're talking about. And there's a challenge of, protecting the kind of privacy of our community with what you do with that data as well. So the way we're using it is to match them to the right service at the right time, at the right price point. But that's, other people might do other things with that data. And, I do think something that's interesting in a kind of world of AI where the kind of admin processes, potentially you can talk to Claude or ChatGPT and get them to, I wouldn't recommend it, but they could help you and coach you through that process. I think we're going to have this kind of split, this slightly tangential answer, but where we've got lots of AI agents that help us do certain things.
Yes.
And then we'll want to then talk to real humans that, whether that's for product reviews or because we're feeling lonely, or because we really like a certain musician and they do too. And I think the value of community and peer-to-peer conversation is going to increase once we've kind of streamlined so much with AI.
Once the administration sides are taken care of, then the actual human side can get access to the things, or the people can get access to the things they need through other people.
Yeah.
While you were talking about all of that, I was starting to think about wills. You probably got information on it. I have no idea, but I would imagine it's one of those things. Everyone should have a will, but not enough people do them for the reasons we've talked about, and they just don't want to think about it. I'm imagining from a data and digital living, we're all becoming more complicated. Our kind of the roots we're putting down in the world are more and more complex than they were in the past, where assets were much simpler. I think about the amount of accounts and subscriptions you mentioned as well. So I was wondering, is there a responsibility on the individuals who, all of us, we're alive and we are not thinking about how we make those preparations. So, of course, for the loved ones that are trying to sort out an estate, that's one thing. But should more people be, using tools and therefore driving that market to create more tools to manage what happens when they're gone?
Yeah, definitely. I think the latest stat was that 45% of the population have a will.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, and you can make a will for free. So there is an emotional barrier to making a will. It's the easiest thing you can do to protect your loved ones. I would recommend everyone does it. But to your point, the best thing you can do is, create whether it's digitally or it's on a folder, whatever it looks like, a place that says, these are all the things you need to know. And there are some services that exist. We work with a partner that helps you create like a digital vault to store kind of all your accounts and logins so that your beneficiaries or loved ones, next of kin, can access them after you die.
I mean, companies could offer that to employees, couldn't they?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I work in tech, so my immediate thing is it secure? Because you're kind of putting, everything in there. If there are, again, from a business like yours, recommended services that are actually decent, if there are services like that out there, then, employers could say to their employees, here's stuff you could be using.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. And I think that is kind of the route to market for a lot of digital kind of vaults that exist. And there's a kind of, creating a digital vault, doing a will, power of attorney, and also thinking about like financial planning as well. So, you want to do that early to make sure the estate doesn't put them in a big kind of pickle, for want of a better term. So, there needs to be enough liquidity as well to pay things like inheritance tax. So, there's lots of things you can think about in advance, and I'd recommend people to do that for sure. It's like the most loving thing you can do for your loved ones is to kind of make it easy for them so they can focus on grieving you and not having to do, hunting down subscriptions and hunting down accounts. I mean, in a weird way, there is some positive to everything moving digitally, which is that you can actually see, what subscriptions and payments are coming out of people's accounts. So there's a positive there. The question is like, how do you locate lots of assets? You might have multiple accounts. So there's that question. And we work with a partner that does help you search for different assets in different places and different countries and wherever else.
I've started to hear more over the last couple of years about something which I guess the category might be called grief bots. And this idea of, rather than, when somebody has died, trying to in some way bring them back, resurrect them through data and tone of voice and even voice and that sort of thing. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's intrinsically bad, people trying to feel connected to their loved one. But I think when it creates a false sense of continued relationship, that actually means, it's very comforting, but it means that you don't maybe fully accept that they've died. And the result of that actually makes it harder for you to move forwards. And, I think we live with grief our whole lives. You can continue to love and grieve someone your whole life. You can remarry and still love and grieve your previous partner. It doesn't go. But I think the idea that you're maintaining a relationship with them that's two-way is unhelpful. And, I'm quite skeptical. I haven't actually said this on a podcast before, but like about mediums as well. And there's a big market for mediums and psychics. And I think that there's, maybe if it can give someone closure as a kind of one or twice off thing, then fine. But like, I think just anything that maintains a false relationship, I don't think that is the best way to go. And I think that sometimes can be quite exploitative when someone's vulnerable and they're desperate and they're looking for connection.
And they're paying for the service.
Yeah. I think there's been an amazing growth of businesses that ask people to like question. So whilst you're still alive, you record stories and different, aspects of your life. And then after you die, your loved ones get that and they can listen to it and read it or watch it. I think that's lovely. Like that is a way of having a connection with someone that is true to something they've created. But yeah, I don't particularly, in the same way that I think kind of having like proto-social relationships with chatbots is, can also be damaging. I think when there's a purpose, if you're talking to an AI and you're using it to kind of coach you through something, I can see the value in that. But when you start to kind of ascribe value to it as its own individual, that's, I don't know, maybe I'll think differently in 10 years, but that's my view.
I think it's one of those subjects that's, it is still evolving, but it's fundamentally quite an ethical question. So I heard one founder sort of describe it in terms of, their rights, their human rights. It's not that different actually from people saying, I want to live forever by uploading my brain to a computer. But this founder was saying, well, it's my right not to grieve because I want to, I want to get on and enjoy my life. And that's why I've built a system that can take someone's, all of the data about someone's mother and create a bot that means that person can still feel connected and they'll never have to go through the grief process. And they thought that was sort of evolution in a good way.
It's the same as the longevity movement. It's like, let's try and fight death rather than accept it. And that's fine. You know, if someone wants to live like that, that's their choice. But I think the beauty of being human is, I'm not saying anyone should go through immense pain and suffering, but we are human. And part of the reason what makes us human is that we do die. And I think by fighting that, you're fundamentally denying a part of what it means to be alive. So, maybe that is a way that some people would choose to live, but I guess that's not how I would. And I think my observation is that it's okay and a good thing if people start to come to terms with death. We used to say Untangle helps people rebuild life after loss. And, that I think if you can start to rebuild your life, even if it looks different and it's not how you wanted it to be and it's not the first choice life, I think that's a positive thing.
You've had a very unique insight and continue to into this space which people don't talk about. What has running Untangle and being involved in grief maybe taught you about life and your own beliefs in life and maybe your beliefs in the afterlife as well?
I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say all this in theory. In reality, I just live my life like everyone else. I have days when I feel shit and I don't want to get out, don't want to do the things and go to the gym. And, I'm not embracing every moment, I'm human. And I also think that, you can understand grief and intellectually and have been close to it. But I still think that, if my partner dropped dead tomorrow, I would be in excruciating pain and grief. So in some sense, nothing. But I mean, one of the things I find really, I'll come back to myself in a second, but in the Untangle community, we have people from all different kind of walks of life, political extremes. And I know this because I see sometimes on our Instagram the people that follow us and comment and engage, and they'll have certain political flags or slogans and things in their profile pictures. And so you can see there's a huge range of people. But actually that never comes up in our support groups because death is such a leveler. So people that would probably hate each other and argue in any other space, when they're talking about grief and the pain of that, are just two people, humans that have experienced loss. And I'm kind of proud of that because I think that that's such a reminder that we are all human and that's what's core. And so maybe we need grief support groups to heal the world, who knows? But so I think what it's made me feel, I don't know, I'm kind of agnostic in terms of if there's an afterlife or not. Who knows? But I think trying to live life well and enjoy what you can, and that's not always possible. And I think also part of Untangle, to some extent, was me probably doing my own version of the longevity movement, which was trying to come to terms with grief and the fact that the people I love and close to me might die. So my way of dealing with death was to be I'm going to lean into it so hard and talk about it all the time. So maybe I've got my own kind of processing happening there, but in a completely different way. But I don't know. I think it's just made me see we're all human, we're all different. Shit happens and you just got to live your life, basically. So it's not very profound, but that's the truth.
Well, there's a refreshing honesty and openness to the way you talk about, a difficult subject. And I'm kind of extrapolating that carries through into a directness of the way you engage with life in general. That's the feeling I get from talking to you.
Yeah, I think that's true. Actually, I actually saw a Holocaust survivor speak on Tuesday evening, and someone, asked her this question at the end, about a kind of meaning and, why did she think she survived? And, was, I think, trying to find some kind of profound insight into her, really hard experience. And she was just I don't know why I'm still here. It's just, I just got through each day and that's, all I could do. And I thought it was kind of amazing to hear that from someone who's, really seen humanity at their worst, to just say, yeah, I just kind of got through each day and that's it. And I think that is ultimately we're just little animals on a planet. And, we want, I think we're all, I feel I don't know, I'm pursuing some kind of meaning in my life. I don't know, but ultimately I'm going to die, and that legacy will disappear. And so I think trying to, live with that. I'm quite an open person. I definitely would say that's true. That's probably the product of it. And I like talking to people about things that are difficult, and because it's really interesting.
In a funny sort of way, it seems as though working in a very difficult space has energized you, and by talking about things that people normally don't. My reading from this, a moment which really can say, is that you've really had to come to terms with the idea that people do die, and maybe in a way that's empowering, and that's an empowerment that these alternative movements of wanting to live forever will never see. They'll never see that empowerment.
I think what's quite interesting is especially actually when I look at health and wellness, that's grown so much as a category of like an industry. And a lot of that, I think, is people trying to pursue some kind of like secular enlightenment. So through society, and that's not a good thing necessarily. There's been lots and lots of issues, but there was kind of religion, and you had your sense of purpose, and your, this is your deity, and you understood where you lived. You sat in a community. And then in like the 20th and 21st centuries, we've kind of moved into this like kind of more kind of capitalist society where as individuals, we now look internally rather than out to community to find purpose and meaning. So, everyone's in therapy. Therapy can be amazing. I've done lots of therapy, but a lot of that is like, if I understand myself better, I will feel good, and I will live a meaningful life. And I think that in a way, like the wellness movement is a build on that, which is like, if I'm just, running marathons and doing all these things all the time and really looking after myself, I will be happy and I will live a good life. And I think that actually maybe we're struggling as a societal, like kind of Western modern secular society, to find a way of getting meaning and purpose, and a sense of belonging, because I do think community is really important, and somehow. And I think there is a bit of a movement towards like, social run clubs as an example of people like they're running, but actually they're connecting with people on a Sunday, where people might have gone to church or something else. I'm not necessarily advocating for religion, but a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. That's something I've observed through dealing with people that have and supporting people and observing when we go through a death. A lot of people have like a bit of an identity crisis, and you think like, what's the point? And off the back of that, start to explore like, who are my people, and also like, what's the point of my life? And I think like as humans, we're all kind of doing that, and I think we're struggling a little bit at the moment. And that's like, everyone talks about this loneliness epidemic, and you see like political extremity emerging, and that is people trying to find belonging and purpose, I think. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think looking at death and people going through grief kind of makes you step back and look at society as a whole, and like fundamentally, what are humans wired for and what do we need? And I think that's my insight of what comes out. I don't know what the answer is, but I think there's a bit of a void at the moment, and we're not sure how to fill it.
Belonging, connection, sense of being part of something beyond sort of the individual consumer who's being kind of given material things, and being told by society to pursue that at every opportunity. There's clearly something in people trying to find something to connect with, and because of what you do, you're right at the face of it. And you mentioned in your communities where you have, maybe people with very different views on life, but under the surface, they've got very, very similar views on life.
You can look at someone who's quite extreme as a person, maybe, and look at it through that lens, and then you kind of can have more empathy for them, because you're like, wow, you're just kind of doing that human thing of trying to find connection and purpose.
What a lovely place to come to when we're talking about heartwarming, where we started off by talking about grief and kind of come full circle through that. Which brings me to my last question, Emily, and I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. If somebody is listening to this podcast, say in 5 years' time, they go back and find a 5-year-old podcast and listen to it, what would be the one message you would want them to take away from it?
Gosh, I don't know. Make a will, and just have a nice day.
Seemed like a great answer to me. Thanks very much for
Thank
coming on the
you so
podcast.
much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening.